Mummies, gold and an obsessive belief in the afterlife. These concepts are all central to our image of ancient Egypt. But how important were they to the Egyptians, and how long did they survive after the last of the pharaohs? This video explores expectations of a life after death during the relatively little known Greco-Roman period of Egyptian history, when Egypt was ruled first by a Greek royal family ending with Queen Cleopatra VII, then by Roman emperors between 300 BC and 300 AD. Wealthy members of this multicultural society made elaborate preparations for the afterlife, combining Egyptian, Greek and Roman ideals of eternal beauty. The helmet to the left is a Greek helmet. During the 7th century BC, pharaohs employed many Greek mercenary warriors to help fight Egypt's enemies. This distinctively Greek-style helmet dates to around that time and was likely to be left at a Greek temple as a religious gift to the gods. The helmet to the right is an Assyrian helmet. In 664 BC, an army led by the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal sacked the sacred city of Thebes in the south of Egypt. The archaeologist Flinders Petrie discovered this distinctively shaped Assyrian-style helmet on the west bank of Thebes, which is modern Luxor, and suggested it could date to that conflict. The object to the left is a female form vessel. A number of Cypriot vessel types have been found in Egypt, and examples of Egyptian objects found on the island of Cyprus, indicating a trade connection from at least the mid-2nd millennium BC. This vessel found on Cyprus takes the form of an Egyptian woman with distinctive long wig holding a duck. The middle two are animal vessels. Many Egyptian or Egyptian-style objects have been found in Greece, made to contain small amounts of luxury cosmetics like perfume. These vessels take exotic forms. Hedgehogs, baboons and lotus flower motifs are common in Egyptian designs. To the right is a bust of Isis, the cult of the Egyptian mother god Isis, spread throughout the Roman Empire as far north as Britain. This bust shows Isis in classical form, with her hair in typical corkscrew curls. Her Egyptian identity is indicated by the stylized solar disk and cow's horns above her head. Egypt has been accustomed to foreign rulers. Alexander the Great was just one in a line of pharaohs born outside Egypt. His arrival in 332 BC brought about 3 centuries of rule by Macedonian Greek kings called Ptolemies. With the death of the last ruler of the dynasty, Queen Cleopatra VII, in 31 BC, Egypt became part of the Roman Empire for a further 4 centuries. This era of Egyptian history is often called the Greco-Roman period. Starting from the figure in the top left is the figure of Zeus. Zeus was the king of the Greek gods. His classical appearance inspired depictions of Serapis, a multicultural god promoted by the Ptolemies, combining the Egyptian god Osiris with a number of Hellenistic deities. Worship of Serapis travelled far outside Egypt's borders throughout the Roman Empire. The second one is the terracotta of Harpocrates on a goose. Geese were one of the sacred animals of the Theban god Amun. Although the significance of the bird here is not entirely clear, Harpocrates had his hand in a pot, which is a common motif, although of uncertain meaning. The third one is of Harpocrates with a double crown. Harpocrates was a Greco-Roman version of the Egyptian god Horus the Child, who traditionally wore the double crown of a united Egypt. Here the god holds a jar in his left hand, a motif of uncertain significance. And in the right corner, Harpocrates on horseback. The child god, Harpocrates, rides a galloping horse and wears a miniature version of the double crown of Egypt. The form of this figurine may echo an earlier motif of the infant god pacifying chaos or danger, represented here by the rearing stallion. Underneath, starting in the bottom left-hand corner, is an incense burner. This perforated vessel allowed the fragrant smoke of burning incense to fumigate a sacred or domestic space. The distinctive technique of applied clay decoration, called barbotine, is typical of some types of Meroitic ceramics. In the middle is the figurine of Demeter. The Greek goddess Demeter is identifiable by the long torch she holds for the Greeks. Demeter was the goddess of the harvest and agriculture, a deity appropriate for an agrarian society such as that of Egypt, especially as sites like those in the fertile Phaeomeria. And finally, the figurine of Isis Aphrodite. The plumed crown marks this otherwise classical figurine as a representation of the goddess Isis Aphrodite. Increasingly in the last centuries BC, Isis took on the cow-horned head of Hathor, and those two Egyptian goddesses in some sense became indistinguishable. Aphrodite was the Greek goddess of love and associated with both Hathor and Isis. Figurines of Hathor. Various goddesses have been identified as being represented by this distinctive form, including Isis and Aphrodite. Although the Egyptian goddess Hathor is most likely, she represented sexuality as well as rebirth, and this curvaceous form is replicated in a number of female coffins of the Greco-Roman period. Bes as a soldier. The Egyptian god Bes was traditionally depicted as an aggressive being, effective at warding off evil spirits, especially from new mothers and young children. He wears Macedonian-style armour, so probably dates to the Ptolemaic period, whose rulers' origin were in Macedon. Shrine carried in procession, once believed to show an elite lady being carried by porters in a sedan chair. A more likely interpretation of this figurine is that it represents a statue of a goddess being carried in procession by priests. Production of such terracottas may have coincided with religious celebrations. And Harpocrates on a hippo. Hippopotami were fearsome animals that lived on the banks of the River Nile, yet they were also a powerful Egyptian symbol of protection for the vulnerable. The form of this figurine may allude to the child god Harpocrates as a protector. While the gods depicted in Egyptian temples almost always adopt traditionally pharaonic forms, there is plentiful evidence of the worship of a much wider variety of deities in people's homes during the Greco-Roman period. Many thousands of hollow terracotta figurines survive, deriving mainly from domestic contexts, although some have also been found near temples and in graves. Generally, these display a preference for a classical appearance, but often combine pharaonic elements, although most never inscribe. Specific features make individual deities easy to recognise. This is a mummy of a man called Artemidorus. The archaeologist Flinders Petrie claimed that this 2nd century AD mummy was found as part of a family group at Hawara. Decorated with Egyptian funerary symbols, a Greek text identifies the deceased with the words Artemidorus, farewell. Although damaged, the portrait still shows a mature bearded man. A crown of justification has been added around his head in gold leaf, a mixture of Egyptian, Greek and Roman ideas about the status of the deceased. Unusually, the name of the deceased is given with the words Artemidorus, farewell, written in Greek on the chest. This mummy was found with 2 others that were similarly identified. Well into Roman rule of Egypt in the 1st centuries AD, the god Osiris was still worshipped as the deity associated with new life and rebirth. His image is included on the mummy of Artemidorus as a promise of resurrection and to provide ancient magical protection. Stela of Power. The upper scene shows a man named Power adoring the god Osiris and his divine sisters Isis and Nephthys. The first line of text is in Demotic, the everyday script of literate Egyptians, while the rest is in hieroglyphics, the traditional religious script that was understood by few outside the priesthood. The central scene shows the deceased as a mummy held up by the jackal-headed god Anubis before Osiris, the ruler of the underworld, his wife Isis and another figure of Anubis. Both a funeral ritual of opening the mouth and the welcome into the afterlife are mixed. The Greek text wishes the deceased farewell. This stela was set up at Abydos, the site most sacred to Osiris, the god of rebirth. It shows a man in Greek dress between two wrapped divine forms. Their jackal heads imply they represent the gods Anubis. The mixture of Greek and Egyptian elements is typical of multicultural expectations of the afterlife in Greco-Roman Egypt. This simple stela has a salutation in Greek to a deceased man, Dinasarin, aged 45, who kindly one be of God cheer. This one of very few remains of monumental inscriptions of grave markers from Hawara, where most burials seem to have gone unidentified. This Greek text documents a wealthy woman's purchase of a 12-year-old Syrian slave girl called Zonena, or Zoe in Greek, for the price of 5 talents and 5,000 drachmas. The sale was concluded in AD 282/3 and illustrates the trans-regional slave trade active throughout the Roman Empire. This ostrakon, the ancient equivalent of scrap paper, is a reused piece of potsherd with inked notation in Demotic script dated to 102 BC in the reign of Queen Cleopatra III and King Ptolemy X. It records the tax paid on land near the temple complex of Karnak, modern Luxor, and the production of wine there. One of the most common types of documents to survive from Egypt in antiquity are wills, the legal document governing the transfer of property from one individual to another. This Greek papyrus carries part of the will of Plution, son of Icarion. These small tablets have a shallow depression for wax, which could be etched with a stylus or pen and easily corrected or wiped clean. They may have been used for writing practice or for carrying messages, as remains of the fixing of a protective cover suggests. During the Greco-Roman period, preparations for death and the afterlife were influenced by Egyptian, Greek and Roman traditions. Greeks and Romans had rather bleak expectations for an existence after death. However, the Egyptian afterlife offered them the possibility of being reborn into a bright, perfected version of this world, to join Osiris, the god of rebirth and ruler of the underworld, and to live on for eternity. The funeral was an important opportunity to display wealth and status. Coffins, masks and mummy decorations were bright and eye-catching, involving costly materials for the wealthy. These show the deceased as alive and awake at the moment of rebirth, magically assuring that this would be the case. People are depicted as perfect versions of themselves. Even those who died as children appear as if they'd grown up so they could enjoy the afterlife to the fullest. Many young children did not live into adulthood. This young girl holds a floral garland and her right hand is raised, palm outwards, in a gesture of greetings or prayer. Her figure is framed by scenes of Egyptian gods within a pharaonic gateway, as if emerging from a shrine, suggesting the divine nature of the deceased. This is one of a series of mould-made masks built up from layers of linen and plaster, typical of the Fayum region during the Ptolemaic and Roman periods. The distinctive blue colour of the head covering is an emulsion of the lapis lazuli, believed to be the hair of Egyptian deities, thus associating the deceased with the divine. The hieroglyphic inscription on this decorated piece of cartonnage, similar to paper mache, names the deceased as Nimatra, one of the names of Amenemhat III, a king venerated as a god at Hawara and who lived around 1500 years before the owner of this object was born. Decorated with a human-headed scarab, this chest cover provided magical protection for the heart of the deceased. Lines show where the mummy's linen wrappings, once used to hold the piece in place, have been removed. A short note written in Demotic script on the reverse gives the name of the owner. The design of this mask, with gilded details and the eyes added in glass, indicate that it came from a group of near identical masks found at the site of Maya in Middle Egypt. Other examples have deep side projections to cover the head that often carry colourful scenes of Egyptian gods. These plaster heads were attached to coffin lids or fixed directly onto mummies and show the deceased as if awakened. Like the painted portraits, they display different fashions in hairstyles and jewellery. These were easily detached and often sold on the art market. This mask still retains much of its original paint colouring, with a black hair and purple striped garment. Weaver's marks on each side of this cloth are shown as white stripes at a right angle and notched at the ends. This open-work panel shows the goddess Isis stretching her wings protectively behind her husband Osiris, the god of rebirth. Hieroglyphics spell out his name. The distinctive artistic style resembles those from Tuna el Gebel in Middle Egypt, suggesting an origin for this unprovenanced piece. This moulded plaster and a linen cover was made to be placed over the mummy of an unnamed girl. She wears Greek-style dress and jewellery normally worn by an adult. The elaborate floral headpiece and curvaceous adult body proportions evoke contemporary figurines of the goddess Hathor. The style suggests a date of the 1st century BC. This unnamed woman has her hair in fashionable Roman style and wears pharaonic-inspired coiled serpent bangles typical of 1st century AD Hawara. Although lacking any remaining trace of a decorated outer shroud, the mask is carefully modelled in gilded plaster with inlaid eyes and eyelashes added in bronze. This elaborate mummy mask shows a man with a slight goatee-style beard emerging as if from a hood. He holds a floral wreath and a rolled-up papyrus, a sign of literacy, initiation and status. The mask has been extensively restored in modern times. While glittering golden skin identified the deceased as divine, additional protection might be provided by amuletic symbols. The Wedja Eye, or Eye of Horus, was especially protective when worn on the brow, and separate Wedja Eye amulets have been found placed directly upon the forehead of mummies. This mummy mask has featured derived from much earlier coffins and masks, which may either show the straps used to attach a false beard or part of a necklace worn by the deceased. Patches of gilding have been applied in rectangles to the flesh areas.
We've been to most of these places, haven't we?
We have, yeah.
Yeah.
There's another one if you want. Can you squeeze in? Thank you.
With their long full headdresses, traditional pharaonic mummy masks often appear rather genderless to a modern viewer. Both the stylised curls of hair and the presence of earrings indicate that this unidentified mask was intended for a woman. Modelled in the form of an adult woman in miniature, this young girl appears both as a wealthy Roman in her gilded Carthage mask and with extensive Egyptian scenes on her outer shroud. This is typical of 1st century AD Hawara. Remarking on her jewellery, the archaeologist Flinders Petrie described her rather haughtily as too splendaciously got up. Contemporary with mummy portraits and masks in Egypt, elsewhere in the Roman Empire, stone busts were made to commemorate the deceased. One bust represents an unnamed woman wearing a veil over a turban and headband. The other depicts a bearded man who holds a book roll. To his left is an inscription in Pimarina script, Alash Yeraheh, son of Yaheh, son of Halpata. This mummy of a man from Hawara has a portrait showing a mature, bearded individual. The style of the portrait indicates a date during the reign of the Emperor Hadrian, AD 117 to AD 138. The outer wrappings carrying a depiction of an elaborate collar and traditional Egyptian funerary scenes. This mummy from Hawara is one of only around 100 from this period which survived with the portrait intact. The portrait depicts a young man wearing a crown of laurel leaves, a sign of justification after death. CT scans show folds of flesh which indicate obesity in life, meaning that the portrait is likely to differ significantly from his living appearance. Evidence from the CT scans of the body within shows evidence of folds of skin that imply that this individual is overweight. This suggests that the portraits were not necessarily a depiction of the true appearance of the individual in life. If you look closely, you can see that a very thin layer of gold paint has been added between the lips. Gold leaf was sometimes placed on the tongue of the deceased in the Roman period to imply divinity and safe passage to the afterlife. The mummy of this man is elaborately wrapped in a style that is typical of the Roman period. Radiocarbon dating conducted by the University of Manchester has shown this rhomboid-shaped design probably originated on the animal mummies. The decorated footcase of the mummy shows the enemies of the deceased being trodden underfoot for eternity. Based on images of the traditional enemies of Egypt, in some sense this shows the victory over death itself. This man's bare chest is a reference to athletic youthfulness, since exercising in the gymnasium, an important social hub for the elite, was a pastime of wealthy men in Roman Egypt. The subject's hairstyle and beard suggests a date late in the reign of Emperor Trajan or early in that of Hadrian. This man wears a white tunic with dark red stripes called clavi and a studded sword belt or beltius. These indicate military dress and suggest that the man was a soldier. His hairstyle and beard copy the third portrait type of the Emperor Commodus, which dates this portrait to between AD 185 and 195. This woman wears a dark red tunic, gold hoop earrings with pearls and a necklace of coloured stones separated by round gold beads. Her hair is coiled in a large bun at the top of her head with centrally parted waves around her face. This style dates the portrait to the early Antonine period between AD 138 and 160. This woman wears a reddish-purple tunic with a black stripe called a clavus and a reddish-purple garment drawn over her left shoulder. Her dark curly hair is arranged in curls over her forehead and in front of her ears, with the rest of the hair on top of her head. This hairstyle suggests a date in the reign of Emperor Trajan, AD 98 to 117. This man wears a white tunic with a dark red stripe called a clavus and a white garment draped over his left shoulder, each a sign of status. The appearance of the portrait suggests a date in the middle of the late 1st century AD. This man wears a white tunic with a dark purple red stripe called a clavus on the front A white garment is draped over his left shoulder. The man has a dark curly hair and his beard is trimmed underneath his jawline. The style of his hair and clothing suggests a date of between AD 110 and 140. This woman's hairstyle dates the portrait to reign of Emperor Hadrian. The woman wears a purple-red dress with a light green under tunic just visible. Her jewellery includes 2 necklaces, one of dark green stones, one of pearls and a pair of gold and pearl earrings. The person in this portrait has short hair and their clothing is difficult to discern. It's been suggested that this is the portrait of a young man. However, around the neck is a plaited cord and a pendant, which rather suggests a female. Her hairstyle indicates that the portrait dates to AD 100 to 130. This young man wears a white tunic with a dark red stripe called a clavus and a white garment draped over his left shoulder, each a sign of status. The man's hairstyle was fashionable during the Flavian period. This woman wears a purple tunic bordered by a black band embroidered in gold. A red or light purple garment is wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair is coiled in a tall bun on top of her head and parted in the middle of her forehead. This hairstyle dates the portrait to the early Antoine period. The small area of the headdress not covered by the bandages is filled with protective scenes of the Egyptian gods. The damaged area of the mask shows a cartonnage construction technique built up in layers of linen and plaster and dates to the 1st century AD.
I've got some like a game one.
The elaborate corkscrew curls and floral headpiece of this woman emphasise festivity, and the unusual exposed breast highlight the importance of sexuality for rebirth. Around the body are a large number of images of unnamed gods, a common motif in religious compositions which provide protection to the deceased. Multicoloured glass was commonly used in jewellery during the Greco-Roman period in place of more valuable stones, sometimes being coated with a thin layer of gold to give eye-catching iridescent. At this period such jewellery was most probably worn by women. These elaborate earrings for an elite woman are very delicately decorated with granulated work and appear rather un-Egyptian in design. The coiled serpent was a symbol of power and protection, its dangerous aspect being harnessed to overcome evil. Such royal prerogatives were adopted in Greco-Roman funerary customs of non-royal people, and similar bangles are depicted on mummy masks coverings of elite women. This is the mummy and coffin of a woman named Tasheri Ankh, which means the living female child, a reflection of the high infant mortality rate in ancient times. The style of the coffin decoration dates to the early Ptolemaic period, perhaps around 300 to 200 BC, and along with the titles held, Tasheri Ankh's parents in the cult of the god Min indicate that she was buried at the important site Akhmim in Upper Egypt. The broad shape of the head indicates an artistic style associated with Akhmim, a site 200 kilometres north of Luxor. Gold leaf added to the face implies the divine status of the deceased, as gods were believed to have flesh of gold. The goddess of Nephthys and Isis flanked the mummy on a bed underneath a set of vessels known as canopic jars, hold the internal organs removed during embalmment. CT scans show Tasheri Ankh's organs were returned to her chest cavity, so these jars are a magical motif. The coffin has a long text inscribed in columns of hieroglyphics. This is a spell number 42 from a funerary text known collectively as the Book of the Dead. The text is designed to protect the deceased from enemies and to associate the body parts with various gods. The outer linen wrappings of the mummy show signs of having been coated in a black tar-like resin. This was especially typical of the Ptolemaic period when Tasheri Ankh died, but was symbolic from much earlier periods of the transformation of the deceased into Osiris. This gilded cartonnage mask was badly damaged when it was first acquired from Egypt. It has been restored in modern times and reattached to the mummy for this exhibition. The head covering has an unusual striped form. The precise identity of this goddess, whose wings stretch protectively over the deceased, is not entirely clear. With a sun disk on her head, she could represent Isis, Hathor or Mat. On the side of the base of the coffin, another depiction of her shows that she is Nut, the sky goddess. This text is important as it strongly implies that the mummy is the intended occupant of the coffin. The names of Tasheri Ankh, daughter of a priest called Eretherera, and a priestess called Muthotep match those on the coffin. Quality timber was rare in ancient Egypt, and wooden coffins were a luxury item for the wealthy. Here the CT scan reveals the rings of the tree trunk from which the wooden sections were made. These were joined together with dowel and covered with plaster and paint. Amun was the chief god of Egypt from around 1900 BC until Roman times. 2 millennia later, he is shown on this sandstone relief with his typical tall crown topped with feathers. Cleaning by museum conservators recently revealed traces of bright blue pigment in the hieroglyphs above Amun's head. These identify him as the king of gods, foremost of Karnak. referring to the temple complex of Amun at Karnak, some 40 kilometres south of Koptos, where this relief was found. The limestone relief carries an image of the god Min, the most important god of the city of Koptos, 40 kilometres north of modern Luxor. Min is identifiable by his tight white robe, red braces and ribbon, tall feathers, raised arm, and the lettuce plants behind him. This relief probably came from a temple of Min at Koptos, dating to the reign of King Senusret. This is the earliest known depiction of Min with black skin. This granite column drum is one of the few surviving fragments of a vast temple complex at Memphis, one of ancient Egypt's great cities. This block came to Manchester because Manchester Museum contributed money to excavations at the site led by English archaeologist Flinders Petrie. The carvings show King Ramesses II worshipping Taf, the god associated with the craftsmen and the city of Memphis. Taf is at the left, wrapped in a divine robe and enclosed in a protective shrine. The king makes offerings to the god, which hieroglyphs caption as giving wine. A man named Usahat held the important title of High Priest of the Seth. Seth was a god often associated with negative forces, but who was an important local deity near Koptos. Here Usahat prays to Seth, who is called the Lord of the Southern Land. The hieroglyphic text records that this monument was made by his son to cause his name to live, a memorial created by a son to commemorate his father. Traces of paint and plaster indicate that this sandstone monument was once brilliantly coloured.